Today, we're going to talk about a Supreme Court case that's not really about guilt or innocence. Nope. It's about something way more basic, the right to even get in the door and make your case. This is all about a legal fight over access, evidence, and what it really means to get a fair shot. So, what happens when the battle isn't about winning the war, but just about earning the right to fight in the first place? Let's get into it. And this is the question right here at the absolute heart of Gutierrez versus Saenz. Just think about it for a second. Imagine you're fighting for a key to a locked door. You have no idea if what's behind that door will save you, but you believe it's your only chance. So, does the law let you fight for the key, even if there's no guarantee about the door? That's the puzzle the Supreme Court had to figure out. So, to really get our heads around this legal puzzle, we've got to start with the person at the center of it all, Ruben Gutierrez. All right, so here's the backstory. Gutierrez was convicted of capital murder way back in 1999 and was sentenced to death. Then, starting in 2010, so for over a decade, he fought to get DNA testing on evidence from the crime scene. His whole argument was that this testing could prove he wasn't even in the victim's home. But again and again, the Texas courts just said no. And it was that constant stream of denials that finally led him to sue in federal court, saying the Texas law itself was the problem. Now, this whole thing really boils down to a super important detail in Texas law. See, you can be found guilty of capital murder just for being part of a robbery where someone ends up getting killed. But, and this is the key, to get the death penalty, the prosecution has to prove you either personally killed the victim or you intended for them to be killed. Gutierrez's entire argument hangs on this one point. He wasn't trying to prove he was innocent of the robbery. He was trying to prove he wasn't eligible for a death sentence. And this slide just lays out the fundamental disagreement perfectly. On one side, you have Gutierrez saying, hey, this DNA will show I wasn't there, which blows a hole in the argument for my death sentence. But the Texas courts, they looked at their own law, Article 64, and said, nope, sorry. Their interpretation was super strict. They said the law only lets you get DNA testing to prove you're innocent of the crime, period. And since Gutierrez admitted to being part of the robbery plan, they figured he'd still be guilty of the crime as a whole, so the DNA test was a no-go. So, after hitting a brick wall in the state courts, Gutierrez turns to the federal system. But there, he runs into a whole different kind of problem. A huge legal hurdle that has nothing to do with DNA at all. It's a concept called standing. Okay, the easiest way to think about legal standing is this. It's your ticket to get into the courthouse. You can't just sue someone because you feel like it. You have to prove three things. First, you've suffered a real concrete harm. That's the injury. Second, you have to show that the person you're suing is the one who caused it. And third, and this is the one that matters most here, you have to show that a win in court is likely to actually fix your problem. That's called redressability. So when the federal appeals court, the Fifth Circuit, took a look at Gutierrez's case, they basically said, sorry, you don't have a ticket. They shut the door on him, ruling he had no standing to even bring the lawsuit. And get this, here's their reasoning. The Fifth Circuit figured that even if Gutierrez won his lawsuit, and even if they said the Texas law was unconstitutional, the prosecutor would still just find some other reason under state law to deny the testing. So in their eyes, a victory wouldn't actually fix anything. They said his problem couldn't be redressed. But that wasn't the end of the line. Gutierrez appealed that decision all the way to the top. So, what did the Supreme Court have to say about this whole ticket to court issue? In one single powerful word, reversed. They completely overturned the lower court's decision. And it wasn't a squeaker either. The vote was 6-3. That's a pretty clear majority, which tells you there was a solid agreement on how to handle this. Justice Sotomayor, who wrote for the majority, really just cut straight through all the legal jargon. She argued that the injury here wasn't just about not getting the test. The real injury was being denied that test because of a potentially unconstitutional law. So a court order that gets rid of that unconstitutional reason, well, that's the fix. It solves the legal injury no matter what the prosecutor might try to do later on. You know, the court wasn't just pulling this out of thin air. They pointed to a really similar case from just the year before called Reed v. Goertz. It involved another Texas prisoner, that same Article 64 law, and this exact same question about standing. So for the majority, the precedent was already set. This was almost like a replay. But like we just saw from the 6-3 vote, not everybody was on board. So what was the argument from the three justices who dissented? So there were basically two different flavors of dissent here. First, Justice Alito took a very practical view. He basically said, look, a win here is just symbolic. It's not really going to get him the DNA testing, so there's still no standing. Then you had Justice Thomas, who made a much broader argument. He said prisoners don't have a fundamental, constitutionally protected right, a liberty interest, in these state-level procedures in the first place. So in his view, the federal court shouldn't even be involved, period.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about some pretty technical legal stuff. Standing, redressability. Why should we care? What's the bigger picture? Because when you boil it all down, this ruling wasn't really about whether Gutierrez should get a DNA test. It was about whether he and people in his situation have the right to walk into a federal court and challenge a state law they think is unfair. It's all about who gets their day in court.
So let's just break down the impact real quick. 1, the court made it clear that just being blocked by a law that might be unconstitutional is a real injury. 2, it clarified what it means to fix that injury. You don't have to promise a perfect ending, you just have to take away the illegal barrier. And 3, and this is the big one, this decision keeps the courthouse doors open for people who want to challenge the fundamental fairness of state rules. So the Supreme Court gave Gutierrez his ticket. He gets to walk through the courthouse doors and make his argument. But it leaves us with this really big, nagging question. How much does a procedural victory, a win on the rules of the game, actually matter if, when all is said and done, you could end up in the exact same spot you started? That's the tension that's going to keep playing out, not just for Ruben Gutierrez, but across our entire legal system.